Hey guys, in today's video, I just wanted to share some tips on what to do if you find mold in your apartment, and the landlord is maybe not willing to fix it, or if they're saying that there is no mold just because there's no visible mold. And I want to share a little bit about my story on like how I have gone through this process so far. So, the first thing you have to do if you suspect mold, even if you don't find it, if you suspect that it's making you sick, is to go and let your landlord know. It's best to get that in writing because you're going to want a paper trail and you're going to want to have like written document that, hey, I let the landlord know. If you're comfortable with letting them know, hey, I think this is making me sick, then, as well, then feel free to include that in there. That is what I did. I initially actually started with just calling, um, and I wasn't getting anywhere really with the phone calls. They wouldn't do any testing. They just kept saying that initially, the very first time they did find mold and they sprayed it, but I suspected that there was more mold in my apartment other than what was visible there because I only felt sick in my apartment. I didn't feel sick like when I went to work. I didn't feel sick when I went to visit my mom. It was just when I was in my apartment. Um, and it got to the point actually where I dreaded going back into my apartment. Like, my body knew what was going on before I did, before I connected the dots. So since the phone calls were not, like, the verbal conversations were not working and that can't be documented really anywhere other than me writing a note, I decided, okay, I'll let them know in writing. Hey, I think that there's still mold in these spots. Um, I'm feeling sick. I would really like for someone to go and check this out. And what happened was that they did go and check it out, but they tried to assure me that the spots that I was talking about was just mildew and that there was no mold. They would not do any testing to confirm or anything like that. So, again, having it in writing helps. If they do not agree to do any testing for the mold, then the next step would be for you to go and test it yourself. And Real Time Laboratories has a kit. I think it's around $399, which I know is a lot of money initially. At least for the first test is $399. It's cheaper if you retest after that. However, what I like about that test is that it not only tests for molds, it also will test for the toxins. It'll test for the most common ones that research has found has been harmful to humans. So when you get those results back, you can let the landlord know, hey, not only is there mold, but there's toxins in this unit too, and it's making me sick if that's what's come back on your report. And that can help a lot because the report that's a third party unbiased report that's just coming back from the samples that you send. So what I did is I got one of those tests and I swabbed all of the ventilation systems because since it's an air, since they float around the air, I'm like, let me test those systems. And then I also tested the spots that I suspected were actually mold, that was in the bathroom. And it came back. A lot of those molds that are harmful came back positive, and a lot of those toxins came back way higher than what is considered normal, for or safe for those levels. And so, what I did at that point is if they do not make repairs, you as a tenant have the right to go and send in a breach of obligation or a breach of contract letter, um, which you can send in along with your testing results. I'm looking at notes, so if I'm looking down, that's why. And so, this breach of contract letter, you want to consult with an attorney if you're able to. But certain places do have templates online where you can just print it out and just fill in the blanks. Like, fill in the person or the company, you know, hey, on this date, I notified you about these repairs. It hasn't been done as of this date, that sort of stuff. And you're going to want to also say what repairs you're asking for, which you would say in the first letter too. When you first notify them in writing, you have to let them know what you actually want them to do. But in this one, you would say what repairs you want done, what date you want them or that they need to be done by. If it's an emergency type of situation, like mine, I would consider emergency because I could not live in my apartment anymore. It was making me so sick. I could not live in it. And I made sure to include that in writing when I sent the first letter to my landlord. But if that is the case for you, I would put that down in the breach of contract letter too, just for paper trail. So that way it's still like, hey, I haven't been back yet. I believe you need to give them around 30 days to do routine things depending on where you live. Like I said, I would consult with an attorney because it's different from state to state. And then say what you will do if the repairs are not done by this date, whether that is, going into court to have it settled that way, whether it is I'm ending the lease, whatever you end up doing, have that in writing. If you want options, just say it's that I would do that. Like my response would be like including but not limited to. So that way it's like, or use the word or, like this or that or and or that kind of thing. So you have options depending on how they respond. So in my case, I sent that along with the breach of contract letter and the results, and let them know, hey, I still have not been able to live in this apartment. And also made sure to ask for reimbursement for the rent because where I live, you still have to pay rent even if you're not living in the apartment or you risk eviction. And I didn't want an eviction on my record. So I still was paying rent here, even though I was paying rent to live somewhere else in the meantime because I couldn't live there and they did not accommodate me with another space to live in at the time. Um, so, a little caveat, if you are on a month to month at this point, they can go and send a 30-day vacate notice for any reason whatsoever, or no reason whatsoever. So they're not supposed to retaliate that way, but there is a chance that they might. That is what happened with my situation. Um, and they asked me to try and get my stuff out, even though I could not stay in the apartment long enough to get anything out. So, but if you have all of this stuff in writing, if you do need to go back into court for damages, if you need to go back into court to get reimbursed for rent for a place you weren't living in, you have all of these documents, so there's not a whole lot really that they can go and argue against because you have everything in writing and all your ducks in a row. If you are in a lease kind of situation, then you kind of are a little more protected from the 30-day vacate notice in that sense, unless you just don't pay your rent or you violated the lease in some other way. But mainly, I think the main thing to worry about is non payment of rent. Again, I would consult with an attorney because I definitely did on each step that I took, for my own purposes and things. I also would add in a little bonus tip is that if you are dealing with mold stuff and it's making you sick, it would be very helpful if you are able to see a provider about it. Um, I happen to work with a functional medicine provider, um, who does test and treat for mold. And when I tested for mold around this time, it came back positive, and the results there, like for my test, actually matched what was coming up in the household as well. So that's another thing that might also help your case, if you're able to find a provider to do that. Real Time Laboratories does, I believe, have a directory where you can find providers that not only use their testing, but will actually, they test and treat for mold. Because if the mold is making you really, really sick, it's not as simple as detox for like 2 or 3 days and then you're good to go. Some people, it's a good months. Like some people, I know 6 months later, they are still detoxing the mold and the toxins out of their system. And there can be a multitude of reasons for that. Some people's detox pathways just don't work as well as everyone else's. Some people are dealing with other things like other infections at the same time, and they do synergistically, uh, you know, make things harder to treat or make things take longer. There are a multitude of different reasons, how long you've been exposed, how much of it is in your system, like that toxin and mold load, too. Um, so, I hope that this was helpful. I did what I ended up doing when I got the 30-day notice is that I decided I didn't want to stay any longer at that point, and it had been a good couple months, but I did end up turning in my keys. Um, so I did not get an eviction, and I just had to. I didn't have any help, so I had to leave my stuff behind, which can be very expensive to replace. And then just in the process of trying to get my money back from for the rent that I did not, the rent that I had to pay when I wasn't living there at the time. You know, even if it's just 1 month's worth, it's a lot. But in my case, it was a good 2 months. So I hope this video was helpful as far as giving you points to consider, some like things to research, maybe even have some questions for when you speak with an attorney about this if you're going through it. I feel you if you are going through this because it's an extremely stressful thing to have to go through, especially if you're sick with it on top of it. But I'd hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys in another video.